Coming up on today's show, for 25 years, Mike Barsamian has coached, counseled, and pastored teens and families from conflict to connection, helping them grow together for a lifetime. He developed the PACE method for parenting and lives in California with his wife and 2 boys. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Chambliss. Coming up, my conversation with Mike Barsamian. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am truly delighted to be here with a friend and a colleague named Mike Barsamian, whom I've met in our entrepreneurial circles, and we've become good friends. And I heard some wonderful things that he said on one of our group calls with our coaches, because I believe if you're going to be a great coach, you also need to have your own excellent coaches. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to invite Mike here today, besides he's just a stellar human being. So, Mike, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here to talk to my listeners.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. And that is high praise. Stellar human being. That is high praise. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I'd love it if you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners here at Loving Without Boundaries in your own words.
Yeah, and thank you, Kitty. I feel the same about you, and I'm very excited to spend some time with you today and get to meet your audience. So I've been a parent coach professionally and maybe specifically for the last 5 years, working specifically with parents and teens, so 11 to 24-year-old kids, to help them grow more close, grow connected and closer and healthy in their relationships and resolve conflict. But I've been working with teenagers specifically since 2002. Yeah, 2002 in a variety of ways. So I started in Christian ministry as a youth pastor. Then I started working in schools, doing some teaching, and then I became a professional counselor. I always distinguish that between a licensed therapist and a psychologist. It's more professional counseling. So I'd, send kids who needed a little bit more to somebody that could serve them better. But and then really started working as a coach. That I feel like that's just who I am. Listening and encouraging and then, coaching became a little more of a pointed profession. And so I thought that's what I want to do. So I dove into that. And so, currently I work primarily with parents. And because if I feel like they kind of take the brunt of the punishment through the teenage years. And so the stronger, healthier, happier parents are, it rolls down into the family. And so if I can help them, honestly, Kitty, what I'm trying to do is teach parents how to coach their kids. Ooh. They don't need to outsource. Again, I'm also a team coach. I do those things in person. We focus mostly on leadership and stuff. But there was a study done recently. 28 to 35-year-olds still say the number one influence in their life is their parent, for good or for bad. Mm-hmm. So I want to swing the needle that 35, 40-year-olds are saying, man, my parents figured it out and they changed my life. So that's what we're working on.
That's a beautiful, incredible mission. I'm honored to know you and to have this conversation with you today. And so much of what you said there resonates with me, because a lot of the clients that I work with, they maybe didn't come from fully functional, healthy families, and myself included. My parents were together their whole lives. They never got divorced, but there was a lot of fighting when I was growing up. There was just a lot of toxic things. And also I remember being a teen and going through my rebellious years, Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
totally.
I joke around. Yeah, exactly. And I grew up Catholic. And so that's partly where the rebellion was coming from. And I think they didn't really know how to handle me, and I certainly didn't know how to handle myself very well. And it's interesting, I think, that now we're both coaches in different respects, but I really appreciate the work that you do. That's really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
And and so I'd love to dive in a little bit more deeply. So of course, we're talking before we got on the recording here today, and I deal with a lot of my clients and the people that I have the honor to serve. A lot of times they've come to me after trust has been broken, after there maybe was some infidelity, some cheating, and there's absolutely no judgments. If you don't know this about me, Mike, I joke around, I'm a recovering Catholic. I didn't really start dating until college because of the sex negativity that was kind of taught to me through.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of shame around that. And then when I started dating, I became a serial monogamist, but then a cheating serial monogamist. So I was the person who was stepping out. And it's probably because I drank the Kool-Aid about, in terms of, from my framework of the way I serve my clients, is that if I was going to be monogamous for the rest of my life, wow, that's a long time. God willing, we're going to live to be in our 70s or our 80s. And what if this person over here is a little bit better than this person? I'm not sure. Let me kind of test that out. But I was doing it unethically. And at the time, I didn't understand that there was this thing called polyamory, or being in a consensually non-monogamous relationship versus non-consensually. So I come upon my work honestly because I suffered through that myself. So rebuilding trust is a big part of the work that I do. And I have some different definitions that I've learned through other mentors that I've worked with of the definition of trust. But one of the reasons I asked you here was I heard you talking about what you called the trust triangle. And I wondered if we could start by just unpacking that a little bit, because I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I'd never heard it before. And it really resonated with me, even thinking about my own current day relationships.
Yeah. Oh man. And thank you for sharing that with me. And I'll trying to think of how to say this. I agree with you 100% that Christians, all churches are all different, but man, there was an era when it was just poisonous to tell people they were less than, they'll never be good enough. We shamed a lot of things. My core value and what I want for my kids is, to wait until the bonds of marriage, that they choose somebody that they love and live that life. But man, shame is the last thing anybody should ever experience. And I'm convinced it's not the way God operates. But man, I think a lot of people have confused what love is. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that story with me.
Absolutely.
Okay, the trust triangle, man. Okay, so the trust triangle itself, the initial concept I got, and I'm trying to look at my bookshelf because I can't remember the name of the exact book. I'll find it. I want to say it was either called, I think it's Unleashed. Unleashed. And I think the girl's last name might be Frey. She was a Harvard business professor who, if you remember when Uber went under a massive distrust in our culture because of the way they were treating drivers, and the CEO who founded Uber just lost his mind. She was brought in to rebuild trust in the organization and also with the public, as Uber was a growing company. So she had created a definition of trust that I thought worked really great organizationally. It doesn't always translate, usually because sometimes the bulky language, organizational language, doesn't always translate to families, but families and relationships are organized. There are things that work in organizations. And so after reading that book, and I've done a lot in organizational leadership and development, I was like, man, we need to know this inside of relationships. And so I've built the trust triangle off of a lot of her concepts and some other really wonderful authors who are doing good stuff. So if you just take a piece of paper in front of you and you draw a triangle, I like to write on the sides of the triangle rather than each point. And the idea is this, that if any one of these three things is missing, the triangle will fall apart. And if anybody's ever been at a bonfire, or if you have a fireplace, or if you enjoy those things, fire science will tell you that if to put a fire out, you just need to take away one of the three things. It's oxygen. If you take away oxygen, the fire goes out. If you take away fuel, like your wood, the fire goes out. If you take away what they would like the heat source, the fire goes out. So if you want something to be on fire, which I think, in the analogy, we want our relationships to be on fire. We talk about that. Then those three things need to exist um, and probably pretty close to balanced or at an appropriate amount, not necessarily co-equal, but an appropriate amount. So the trust triangles, just think of that concept. If I have all three of these things at the appropriate amount, then I'm going to have trust that's on fire. So the first one is going to be, let's talk about honesty. So on any of the sides, you could write honesty. And this is less, it's not so much that I always tell the truth, although that's important. I think all of us would value, I want to tell the truth. It's honesty, even in the sense of authenticity. I am the real me. That inside of a relationship, this is true, for the people, your audience. I want to say your audience, but these are people I care about too. So in terms of your listeners and your audience, they want to be seen for who they really are, not for what they do, not for, and so oftentimes in our culture, we adapt. Man, I've got a client right now that, I think what's sealing the deal for her is she even said, she's like, I feel like a chameleon. I just can't be myself. She's strong. She's smart. She's a wonderful lady. But she's like, I just have to I just adapt to what anybody else wants me. So one of the reasons the relationship with her son is eroding and not working is because she can't be honest with people around her. She can't be the real her. So honesty is, do I see the real you? So in the reciprocal relationship, knowing you, Kitty, you are the real you. In person, on screen, in your writings, you are you. There's no there's something, right? Usually when we meet somebody and we're like, something's off, it's usually because we feel like they're hiding something. And so am I honest about who I am? Do people see the real me? Okay. The next one would be, I would just use the word empathy. You could say care or empathy, but the question in the relationship is, do I feel like you care about me and my needs? There's a lot of wonderful definitions of empathy. That's maybe less the point right now. The idea instead of trust is I trust people who I know care about me. And we receive that knowledge through action, attitude, words, patterns, experiences. So if I don't feel like you care about me, then it's going to be really hard to trust you. And so it's honesty, empathy. And then the last one is good judgment. And the question is, do I feel like you make good decisions? Now that's a whole nother kind of conversation around good judgment. One of my, I would say maybe a mentor from a distance, a guy named Dr. Robert Hartman, he defined good judgment as the ability to observe well, to determine well, and then to do well. So it's kind of a three-part, like good decision-making is, can you take rational and emotional data, so facts, figures, plus feelings and intuition, and experience. So I'm observing, I'm seeing what's going on. Now I'm thinking about it, considering all the factors. I'm looking beyond the surface, I'm asking questions. So I'm putting together information. And then now I have to decide what direction am I going to go. And so good judgment is being able to observe, see, and do. So if you put all three of those things together, if you're going to trust somebody, I need to know, do I know the real you? Can I see who you really are? And do I feel like you're being honest in conversation? Do I feel like you care about me? And then do I believe that you have good judgment in your life and as it relates to me? So if all three of those things are there, you're going to trust somebody. Now, the good news is, because you can get really clear, you can now look at a relationship. You're like, I just don't know. I don't know why I don't trust this person. We'll just run through this framework. Ask yourself these three questions. Do I feel like they're hiding something? Do I feel like they're being honest? Can I really see who they are? If not, start there. Create some conversation around getting to know them, or at least giving them the freedom or the ability to step into who they really are. If it's about empathy, you've got to know, what is it about the experience that you don't feel like they care about you? And then you've got to communicate that. Say, I don't feel like you care about my needs because these things have been happening. And then good judgment is tough. I think that's the hardest one to change, because people have to be willing to accept that they just don't make good decisions sometimes. And most of us shoot from the hip because we're so busy. We don't have the energy to make good decisions. But here's, honestly, I think this is the most important one, is growing your good judgment, because frustration is the fast track to bad decisions, and bad decisions create regret, and regret is always more painful than dealing with something in front of you. Because regret you will deal with for life, but the pain of communicating and conflict and confrontation, yeah, that's going to hurt too, but temporarily. But regret seems to be forever. So that's the trust triangle in its almost simplest form, I suppose.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've never heard that before. And thanks for telling us a little bit more about where you originally learned about it as well. But I appreciate how well you articulated it with the simple questions, the framework. Yet again, it blew my mind when I heard it, partly because I'd never heard anything put that way. And there was a situation in my life when you had said it where I was like, that's it. Like there was a feeling that I had where I couldn't quite put my finger on why I was having some issues with a particular person in my life. And for me, the one that hit home that I'd never heard before was the good judgment piece. And it was partly because, and some of it is, in my work, we talk a lot about the difference between needs and strategies and judging someone. So I'll tell you about that really briefly. This I learned from somebody named Max Rivers. He talks about, and it's related to nonviolent communication, but he talks about that needs are all life-affirming, positive, and beautiful, and that they're never in conflict because we all have human needs, but our strategies to get those needs met might be in conflict sometimes, and that's where we can use our communication skills to negotiate that. And when we judge somebody else, it's really a tragic expression of our needs, because usually when we judge somebody, like say I tell you that you're a slob, right? I live with you and you're a slob. I'm masking my need, say, for maybe order in my house or my physical well-being, to not trip over your stuff that's all over the floor, by calling you a slob. And then I'm tragically not going to get that need met, because then it creates a different need in you for safety, and you might get defensive, and then we might start to get on what I call the field of battle and start arguing. And I bring this up just because when you mentioned good judgments, we're partly judging in a way what the other person's judgment is. But at the same time, there's still you listening, I think, to your own intuition. And we do get to have an opinion. And so there was a person in my life where, just as I got to know them, I was like, I just don't like the decisions that they're making for this reason or this reason or this reason. And maybe the reason I don't like those decisions is they're out of alignment with my values. 100%. So it's also a compatibility thing. And we talked about values before we got on the call. So I'm happy if you want to touch on that. But it just really resonated with me. It was like, that it gave me some validation that I wasn't crazy, that something wasn't sitting right. And it was partly because I didn't feel that this person was making good decisions, like over years and years and years of knowing them. And kind of trusting my gut on that. And it doesn't have to necessarily mean I'm judging them in a negative way. It can really be me checking in with myself about what are my core values, what are my boundaries, and what are the potential consequences of this person's decisions that might negatively affect their life and cause them regret, or what are the negative consequences of their decisions that might negatively affect my life, and maybe I want to create some more separation there. So I'll stop there, but I'd love it if you maybe chime in with whatever you want, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the way you think about values that we were talking about before we started recording.
Yeah, and I just, praise to you for the self-reflection and understanding about what was going on. When you talk about criticism, which is really, really common through the teen years, because they stop being children, which are easier. Children, 0 to 10, are much easier to control, not in the manipulative sense, but you can typically tell a child to do something and they'll do it. It's more of a nurturing state. But as soon as they get into the teenage years, it's easy to be critical of our kids and the way that they behave. And then certainly in adult relationships, we can be very critical, or somebody might say, I just want to give you some feedback. And here's what's really interesting. We want to believe that criticism and feedback is about what we're doing wrong, but it's not. Criticism and feedback is the presentation of the other person's values and what they care about. That has nothing to do with my performance, nothing to do with my worth, nothing to do with how good or bad I do something. It just tells me in a authoritative relationship, or somebody that I trust or give influence to, they're telling me what they care about and whether or not they think I measure up to what their values are. So if, inside of, to your example, if you said, Mike, you're such a slob. Okay, well, what, and then you nailed it perfectly. You said, well, for you, the value is organization, cleanliness, neatness. It creates less chaos in your life and more peace. So really what you're saying is, Mike, you're not living at the level of my values that I want you to. That's a different conversation. That usually becomes collaborative versus combative. Combative is, you're such a slob. Now you're making, but really now I could take that and I could let that live in my brain and be like, I'm such a slob. And then I really become a slob everywhere else, or I get really down on myself until I understand, well, Kitty's just telling me what she really cares about. Do I care enough about her to listen, dig a little deeper, and then make some adjustments? Which again has nothing to do with my value. It just has to do with the way that we live within our organized context. So I think that's the first thing is that we have to do as people is understand what our values are. And so one of the things I love to do, especially with teenagers, is they're beginning to deconstruct what they've experienced as kids and they're starting to reconstruct their lives. Parents don't know what their values are either. Most adults, I'm convinced, don't. So I have a process I take people through. I just call it the Life OS because everybody has some sort of operating system. I'm on a Mac, might be on a PC. We got iPhones and Android. It's all iOS. It's all, what's an operating system? Well, operating system is code that gets something to do something. So, when your computer doesn't work or your phone doesn't work, typically it's because something broke in the code. Like my buddy's in IT and he says the very first thing to do is just turn it off, turn it on because it resets the code. It resets the operating parameters. Sometimes we need to reset, but we need to know what our values are because those are the driving things behind our beliefs and then behind our behaviors. And oftentimes we try to control behavior and that's exhausting. Habits, in my opinion, habits are only an indication of what you really love to do. I don't think you build a habit. I think you build a value that you really believe in something. And then that becomes a behavior. And then people say, oh, you have a good habit of working out. Well, I do because deep down the value is fitness or my value is health. And it shows itself, it presents itself in all these other ways. So having values, knowing your values, choosing your values, and really the simple way, what I would tell this to anybody inside or outside of my program is just this, people are talking about you all the time and you'll never, you can't stop that, but you can influence the conversation. And so, you blessed me with high praise earlier in the conversation. But people are talking about me now. And I don't mean that in like, oh, I'm so important. It just means that somebody did something and it reminded them of me. So my hope is the only way I can influence what they're going to say is by living in a way where I'm determined that when my name comes to mind, here's what I want them to say. I want them to say, Mike's considerate. He's respectful. The guy's authentic, right? He's thoughtful. He's very generous. Man, he's enthusiastic about life. Like I have to decide. And as soon as I decide, here's the things I want people to experience. And when people talk about me, I want them to say at least one of those things. That's how you start to craft your values. And then you do a little bit more work to figure it out. But they're critical. And especially in the parenting relationship, when you have a solid set of values, you can weather the storm that is the teenage years. You'll learn how not to take conflict in the relationship personally, which is the hardest. That's what escalates conflict and yelling and screaming is parents get triggered and they feel like a bad mom or bad, especially my friends who've been, have gone through divorce or something. I've got a mom, like one of the things we came to, she's like, man, he just knows how to trigger me now. And it's all the same stuff. And he's turning into his dad and it's like, okay, let's work on that. And so we assign new meaning. But one of the things we talk, and this is important for relationships, I'm sure you talk about it with your community, is we teach parents how to have high standards. We teach them how to hold strong boundaries and how to communicate expectations clearly. And those three things are not synonymous. But we always focus on expectations. And that's the thing that is the hardest for a teenager. Every teenager tells me, My parents have such high expectations. The expectations are too big. I can't meet them. And so then it's like, okay, well, let's dial this back a little bit. Start with standards, and then let's build some boundaries. And then expectations can be meaningful and helpful as guidelines on the road towards the life we really want to experience. And expectations are just a measure. Am I in my lane or am I not? And so that's where that really becomes helpful, is having those three things all built on your value structure.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I love how my favorite number is 3. And I also love when things are just very easy to understand. So I love that you kind of break things down into 3s as well. Which brings me to, before we started recording, you were, I forget what you called it, but we were talking about the 3 things that from your lens you've seen can be really helpful to have in like healthy relationships or healthy dynamics. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, here's another triangle, the relationship triangle.
Okay.
And this one I love because the background is the idea that anything living, in order for it to be healthy, you have to manage its health. And so I think about, going to the doctor, I have to manage my health, which is calories in, calories out, exercise. So in order for something to be healthy, you got to manage it, and you can only manage things that you can measure. And so we oftentimes don't think about measuring our relationships, or we try to measure how good is the other person doing in the relationship, which, like in a health context, is I might blame my personal trainer that I'm out of shape. You're not doing a good enough job as my personal trainer. That's why I'm not like that. We tend to do that,
Right.
my wife or my husband, this, that, or the other. And there's certainly a component to that. But before we look outward, it's okay, let me measure how am I feeling in the experience of this relationship? So again, here's another really simple triangle. The relationships, I think, are growing healthy when the first one, that there's appreciation. A lot of books, tons of relationship books, they always talk about this one. It's about love, trust, respect, all that can be kind of clumped into being appreciated. And appreciated, one, it's different than admiration. Appreciation is all about valuing who you are. Admiration is about valuing what you do. You have accolades, people admire you because you have this success, because you work hard. That's admiration, and that's good. I don't think it doesn't belong in relationships, because then we become performance driven. Well, as long as I keep doing this and I keep doing this and I keep doing this, then they're going to love me. And that's organizational, but it's not relational. And so appreciation, though, is I just love you for you, who you are. And a part of that goes back to trust. I see the real you, so I can show appreciation. And then appreciation is communicated in a lot of different ways. You can talk about love languages, or how does somebody receive. But you can stumble through appreciation, but sometimes it's just saying thank you. Sometimes it's just communicating I love you. Sometimes it's just, and appreciation is also secondarily, it's a economic term. Things appreciate in value. So there's a growing value. So people cherish gold, in uncertain markets, because gold appreciates. If we saw our spouses, kids, partners, friends as people of growing value, it's much easier to appreciate them, care for them. So, I don't know, maybe somebody, packs all their gold in airtight cases, or, I have this hockey stick in my office that was signed by the LA Kings in 1991.
Nice.
That I think is appreciating in value, but I keep it away from my kids and away from my cats. And it's, this is special. So this appreciation is a growing in value. So that's a part of it. And most people say, I just didn't feel appreciated in the relationship. And that's probably true, because appreciation is an experience. The second one, the next side would be communication. How often are we talking in a common way? And so there's logistics. That this is typically where things go wrong with parents with teenagers. It's about schedules. It's about grades. It's about, especially families who are split. When are you coming to my house? When are you going to their house? Or when are you coming home? Whose friend's house are you going to? How much time, it's all, tons of conversation around screen time. It's always logistics. And that's why parents will feel like, man, what happened? My teen used to talk to me all the time. And well, Their time is being captured by all sorts of growing things because of the stage of life they're in, but your communication now has just resorted. We get too busy, or it's easier to just say, how was your day? And it's easier for a teen to say, fine, and that can be really frustrating.
Mhm.
But if you take the time and you start with, man, I really appreciate my teen, you set your intention, you say something better like, hey, what about your day today was really exciting? What about your day today surprised you? Hey, what about your day today was disappointing? Or being able to look at your teen, read their emotions, because you pause enough and say, man, it seems like you're in a really great mood. What happened today that you're in such a great, or man, I'm sensing that something went wrong today. Are you okay?
Mm,
And
mhm.
be a non-judgmental, non-anxious, but that's communication. It's
Yeah. And
common
that
ground.
last one was showing empathy too, which I love.
Yep. They
Mhm.
all work. Eventually, I'm going to build a pyramid of all the triangles I have.
Yeah, that's great.
Just keep stacking sides. So
Mhm.
communication, grow in your communication ability, and it will improve your relationship 100%, especially when people say, I feel heard. How often does somebody say, I just never felt heard? I was talked to, but I never felt heard.
Right.
Well, talking is not necessarily communication. The core to communication is connection. You have to everybody, John Maxwell, really great leader, he said, everybody communicates, very few people connect. So
Mm,
communication is about connection. And then the last one is consideration. So it's appreciation, communication, and consideration. And consideration is a word we use like, oh, that person was considerate, or what an inconsiderate person. And when you break the word down, it comes from two words, the Latin word con, but really it's the Assyrian word sider, S-I-D-E-R,
mhm.
is an old word that was used to consult the stars or gather information from the stars. And the concept is a depth of understanding. Living as a considerate person means I'm living my life with understanding or with wisdom. Um, and inside of a relationship, that means that I am getting to know you, getting to know your needs, paying attention to what's going on in your life. And whether it's as simple as, when my wife comes home and I see that the garage, I got an app that tells me the garage door opens and I know she was at the grocery store. It's me and my two sons. It's like, let's go. She doesn't need to carry the groceries in. She already got them to the car in the first place. And plus, we just want to honor her as mom and wife. So let's be considerate and let's go get the groceries,
Mm,
but consideration is about seeing the other person and meeting their needs and operating with understanding. And when you feel, if you're feeling like, man, this relationship, something's wrong with this relationship, it's not working out, just ask yourself these questions. Do I feel like the other person is being considerate of my needs? Do they ask questions? Do they pay attention to my needs? Do they see me without saying before I have to say something? If yes, okay, check that box. If no, figure out how you're going to communicate and express, like, I just don't feel like you're considerate of my needs in this relationship, which
mhm.
layers with trust,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
um, communication, before you tell somebody you don't communicate with me, it's really okay. You need to learn how to communicate with the other person. Like all of any of these things, trust or relationships, before we want to lay this on somebody else and say, see, you're not measuring up.
Right.
We have to look at ourselves first and say,
Mhm.
am I being considerate? Am I showing appreciation? Am I communicating well? Which is what my goal is to help parents who can get distracted by saying, my teenager's inconsiderate, they're disobedient, they never talk to me, and they don't appreciate all the hard work. It's like one of the first things and I say, yeah, you're right. I'm really sorry you're going through that. That is really, really tough. Now, if you want to do something about it, we can do some work. Here's what we're going to do. And when I ask them to scale themselves 1 to 10 in how well they think they are doing towards their kids, they're usually generous on the negative end. They're like, yeah, I guess I don't show appreciation to my teen. I don't know how.
Mm,
I don't know how to talk to my teen. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess I don't know how to be considerate towards their needs either. And so they're really low. So the good news is when you start, others will reflect. So if you're feeling like you have a lack of appreciation, you got to figure out, how can I appreciate my partner, spouse, teen? And it will reciprocate. But you have to start first. But that's the relationship triangle. And you can measure the health of it And then you got to make decisions as a mature adult from there, whether or not, if this person is just an inconsiderate person towards you and a bunch of other people,
right,
you could try to be considerate for a while. But this is the point of having a really healthy community of trust and support, is not everybody's going to change. And then you got to start asking really important questions, which we talked about, which was really important for your communities. Is this the right person for me? Am I the right person for them? Maybe not. You don't get to say that with your team.
right.
You can, what do they say? You can pick your friends, but you can't pick your kids.
Right. No, that was beautiful. And again, very, very articulate and easy to understand and digest. So thank you for that. And a lot of the clients that I work with, of course, are parents, and also everything that you said can definitely apply to healthy relationships. And I love just having a framework to look at that. Like you said, what gets measured gets managed, and using that scaling on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do I think my partner's doing? Are we in alignment? But I love how you really underscored that personal responsibility too. Instead of blaming or criticizing, where we're kind of giving our power away in a sense, instead having that extreme ownership of how am I doing, and then asking, I love this phrase, be non-critical and ask critical questions. I love that. So
That's
being
really
able to, to say, like, how are we aligning if it is a relationship? And I'd love to bring this full circle, because a lot of times when I'm working with folks, they may find that they are in a toxic dynamic, that they are doing their best to create some positive influence to help create an unhealthy dynamic into more of a healthy dynamic. Sometimes, though, as you already alluded to, maybe one or both people aren't willing to change. Usually they're not coming to a coach if they don't want to change. Usually they're working with a coach because they want to change. But sometimes one person might be dragging the other one along. The word narcissist gets thrown around a lot. And I often tell my clients, hey, look, like you said, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychotherapist. So you and I, meaning the person I'm working with, it's not fair to label a person and put a narcissist tag on their forehead, because we're not qualified to do that. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording too, but I know you work with a lot of single mothers who may have gotten out of toxic relationships. I'd love if you could share your view on the qualities that where we might label somebody a narcissist, and your view on what that really might be behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one is really fascinating because I think sometimes we will label somebody a narcissist to maybe not excuse ourselves, but at least give reason to and meaning to what's going on, because we are searching for reasons and meaning. And the hardest thing to do is look inward and say, well, maybe I didn't show up trustworthy or whatever it may have been. But narcissism is tough because, like I said, none of us, I'm not qualified to call somebody a narcissist, but I do know that there's legitimate clinical narcissism. There's also borderline personality disorder, which I guess is pretty close. That one you really got to pay attention to. But then there's another field of study called axiology we were talking about earlier that I've really kind of dove into. And this is, axiology just means the study of values and how values inform our lives. And there's an assessment I use that I take my clients through, and it can measure everything from stress coping skills and abilities, to how hard somebody is on themselves, how well somebody's doing with their self-care, self-regard. It also measures motivation, self-esteem, confidence. And typically what we find, and this assessment's been going on since the 70s, and it's over 2 million people have taken it in a wide variety of contexts. But here's what's really interesting. People that typically get labeled narcissists are actually critically low on self-esteem, incredibly hard on themselves. So if you think somebody else is critical, and here's where this plays out into marriages, especially ones that have divorced or dissolved, and you feel like you have a combative, narcissistic ex-spouse, more often than not always, I want to clarify, not always, more often than not, if somebody is a critical person, it's because they are very, very critical of themselves internally. And there's this concept I've called, I call it the death triangle. It's not as complex as the relationship one, but it is a combination of highly over-motivated people who have low self-esteem and are really critical of themselves. So the way this works is, if you meet somebody that constantly is setting new goals that they're not meeting, or they're saying they have high ambition, what tends to happen internally for those people is they have some low self-esteem. They don't feel good about themselves. So they're like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go make 6 figures, or I'm going to build this thing, or I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to get in shape, and I'm going to do it in 3 weeks, and I'm going to change my whole life. And so they start making these movements, and then it doesn't work. Whatever the intensity of their thing didn't work. And so then they beat themselves up. I'm a loser. I never get anything right. Blah, blah, blah. I'm such an idiot. Like, I'm not good enough. So they have this internal dialogue, and then that kills the esteem of themselves. They don't trust themselves anymore. We were talking about trust. The word confidence is confidere. It means living with trust. So self-confidence is low. Self-confidence means I'm not living with trust in myself. And so what do? They set another big lofty goal that they're not going to meet. And then they go through the whole cycle again. They don't meet that goal over a certain amount of time. Then they beat themselves up, and then it lowers their self-esteem. And then to feel better, they set another big goal that they can't meet. And it's this downward spiral until we would label them toxic, because they're so unhealthy and so unhappy and so hurt. And there's so much unresolved trauma, and there's so much unresolved grief in their life that they don't know how. If you don't trust yourself, and you don't have a really good relationship with yourself, so take those 2 triangles and just apply them to how you relate to yourself. If that's not there, it's almost impossible to have a healthy relationship with someone else. And so if we label the other person as a narcissist, we create a judgment. And then in our minds, we're like, oh, that person's a narcissist. And you don't have empathy for narcissists, and you don't want to work with narcissists. So if you're, again, with strong, high standards, strong boundaries. But if you know this person because you were married to them, and you take a minute and you're like, you know what? Their parents were highly critical of them. They did have really low self-esteem. They did lack confidence. They do deal with a high inner critic. Man, if you're checking some of those boxes, though, if you want to be collaborative, especially when it comes to your kids, then it's just a shift of mind to, man, what a tough experience for them to live with. And you also can free yourself from their control and manipulation, because they are trying to convince themselves that it must be the other person. That's why my life's not working out. They were a wrong person. They're not good enough. So you can free yourself when you say, oh, I see what's going on. And then you can choose to be any number of things. You could show some appreciation as if they do anything even minor that's good for your kids. You can say, hey, I really appreciate the way you took Johnny. I don't know why Johnny is always the name of boys in examples, but I really appreciate the way you were at his baseball game or anything. I'll tell you what, it's like water in the desert. I say that appreciation is oxygen for the soul. And so when somebody's drowning in life, it's probably because they don't feel appreciated. So the minute you say, and you use that phrase specifically, like in an example, say, you know what, Kitty, I really appreciate the way you saw my passion for parents and trust, and you invited me to speak to your community. Thank you. Even that, I don't know how that experience was for you right there, but just to receive appreciation, you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
I felt good. Got me right in the feels, right in the heart space. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So and maybe they are narcissists. I don't know.
Right.
But if you don't want to live the rest of your life having to say I have a narcissistic ex-spouse and have the experience of feeling controlled and manipulated, never good enough and never worthy, then let's live in a different story. Let's understand what might really be going on. Have empathy for another human being that got wrecked in the most formidable years of their lives, their teenage years, has tons of disappointment, is dealing with loss, unresolved grief. That's a whole nother concept that people don't fully understand. I try to take parents through a grieving process, and they're a little confused at first, but I'm like, we need to grieve the loss of your child. And that's in a number of ways. Sometimes I do have parents. My wife and I lost a child at birth. So
Oh my
that's
gosh,
real.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But so I know what it is to go through a grief journey of physical loss, but parents don't realize. And here's how I know that they haven't grieved yet. They always say, I wish they were like they were when they were 8. They were so cuddly and kind and talked, and now they're nasty and mean. I'm like, oh, hang on a second. They're not them. That child, that 0 to 11-year-old, you still had a meaningful relationship, but they're not around anymore. So grieving just means reconciling and resolving. We went through a transition. We no longer have that child. We no longer have those experiences. When parents try to force their teens to be those kids again, it's saying, you're not who I want. I want that one over there. And that's so painful for a teenager.
Right.
Because it lacks appreciation. It lacks consideration for their needs and growing in who they are. So you get to receive a new child, your teenage child. And here's the thing. Every parent is maturing and growing. You go from being the parent of a child to the parent of a teenager to the parent of a college age person to the parent of a young adult to the parent of your adult child who's going to get married to becoming a grandparent. Even parents have all these transitions coming, and you have to reconcile what was in order to receive what's new and exciting. And so we often, you got to grieve the loss of a job. You got to grieve the loss of a dream. You got to grieve the loss of your youth. Grieving is not just going to a funeral. Grieving is a really important process of reflecting on and appreciating what was and being prepared and ready to receive what's new. Grief actually expands your life. Oftentimes we feel like grief just consumes us, and it can for a short time. But if you go through the process, it actually expands you. It makes you more dynamic. It gives you the opportunity to give and receive more love and give and receive more life if you do it right. But it's a really important part of, and even for friends in both of our communities who we obviously want to serve the best we can, you got to grieve a divorce, of something that was. And when you do that, man, it opens you up and you find yourself free of control, especially a combative ex-spouse that wants to blame the conditions and situation of their life on someone else, which is why it breaks my heart. But this is why moms get beat up the most. And then typically they have more custody. And then, so they're getting beat up by the ex-spouse, they're getting beat up by their kids, then they have to go to work, and oftentimes things aren't working out there. And my analogy is, I did an Instagram reel. I've always said that moms are juice boxes with 100 straws and nothing's left over. At the end of the day, everybody needs or wants something. So when does mom get to rest or do something fun or something meaningful? Which, again, that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Oh, that was incredibly helpful because, again, when we're talking about parent-child relationships or intimate partner, spousal relationships, like it's still just relationships. I mean, family is still just relationships. Whether it's a modern family, a traditional family, it's that's all it is. So I really appreciate everything that you share because I think it's very applicable to anyone who wants to live their best life, whatever that looks like, and help it be as fulfilling and healthy and beautiful as possible. And when I think about grief, partly because, I lost my parents, my father to cancer, my mother to old age, and that sort of thing. And also, we can have estrangement in our families. And also, a lot of the people that I work with might be consciously uncoupling, whether they're married or not. And I recently got back from a wellness retreat in Portugal with somebody named David Thunder. And I think know David Thunder. Yep. And in Portugal, I'd never been there before. I did learn a word that really helps me think about grief through a different lens that I'll share with you and our listeners. And I actually don't know how to pronounce it in Portuguese, but it's spelled Saudade. And they told us that there is no translation in any other language, but it means beautiful sadness. Yeah, beautiful sadness.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
so
that's it.
Right. Because I love that because it's very validating that sadness is simply just a feeling. Grief is just an emotion, and it's okay to feel it. Because to your point, I think sometimes we can beat ourselves up. Why am I still feeling sad? Why am I crying? Why am I still grieving somebody that died 5 years ago? Right. But I love that, changing it and reframing it to beautiful sadness, because when we are feeling grief, it's because there was deep love. We really did connect to somebody. We really appreciated them. They felt like they were somebody who considered our needs. And so it's really kind of honoring that relationship. So I think that I love that reframe of something that might feel hard, whether that's grief or a loss, into beautiful sadness. So
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote that down. I'm going to figure, my brother-in-law is Portuguese.
Oh, fun. Yeah. Yeah, you can help. They tried it. I asked like 10 times.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember it. It was really weird. It's a strange language.
Yeah.
A beautiful language, but I can't speak it very well.
Yeah. But thanks for sharing that with me. That puts the right words to what grief can be. And I think and should be. And I will tell parents this oftentimes, when you talk about death is the end of a life, not the end of a relationship. And, when you talk about, oh, my teen's not a child anymore, or my adult child's not a teen anymore, like, yeah, that stage passed. It doesn't mean you don't have a relationship with that person anymore. Live into that relationship, but keep, what a joy that you get to refresh and get to know them a new way. And, but man, I wrote that one down. I'm going to check that out. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Yeah. And if you look it up online, there's a lot of different definitions for that word, and I loved all of them. So in case that helps you with your work. Yeah. Well, I'm so just really enjoying our conversation. I want to, of course, be respectful of your time and our listeners' time. So I just want to first say, thank you so much for everything that you so generously shared with our listeners, our community, and the work that you're doing. It's so needed, and it's also rippling out into my community, and that's so beautiful. Before I have you share where people can find you, is there any last message you'd like to leave with our listeners? Any final words?
Yeah, I think, even to the point of our conversation at the beginning, shame has no place in our life, and it's such an easy and cheap tool to use if we're not careful. And the way one of the things that we say, well, at least with parents, one of my kind of core, I guess, principles, and I also work in I volunteer as a mentor to teens in middle school and high school, and I lead a volunteer team, and I tell them, we will never shame a kid. We don't make fun of kids. We don't make fun of their hair. We don't make fun of their nose. We don't make fun of the way that they play a sport. We don't, that's old school coach mentality. That's grandpa mentality. I told you earlier, my grandpa used to say that I have a good face for radio because he thought it was funny, but that, especially in the formative years, that leads to shame. And we never, ever, if we're going to make fun of somebody, we're going to make fun of ourselves. And we're going to make light of ourselves. We won't take ourselves too seriously with kids. Just be really cautious. Don't live into shame. Find freedom from it. And don't shame your kids because it's cheap humor. But know that you're loved, you're wonderfully made, and you're meant for healthy, happy relationships. And my hope and prayer is that any of these funny little triangles that I've tried to simplify understandings with would be really, really helpful in your life, and that you'd go live healthy, connected, happy whole lives.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful. That really got me in the feels. I appreciate you so much, and getting to know you, your work, your big heart, and love it. So for anyone who might want to get to know you and your work a little bit better, wants to reach out, or maybe has a teen relationship they want to work on, how can people find you and your work?
Yeah, thank you. So on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, I'm on there right now as Mike the Parent Coach. So just Mike the Parent Coach. And then you can email me directly, mike@presentsolutionforparents.com. And then I would say I've got a lot of free stuff. So if you want to kind of capture that right away, you could go to presentsolutionforparents.com and then /home. we'll take you to where you can register for all kinds of things or download things or listen to stuff. But presentsolutionforparents.com will get you started, even on some freebies. And then that's an easy place to connect with me. And one thing, if you have teens or kids and you want to stop like the battle around chores and really teach them how to value money, I just completed what I call Money School with Coach Mike. And it's a free course, I suppose you'd call it, but they're like 5-minute lessons for you and your kids. But I have a great partnership with a company called Greenlight. And the number one thing that I think stresses family out is finances. And the number one thing that frustrates parents is their kids won't do their chores. So trying to solve those two problems at once and see if we can get some traction. But I'd be happy to share that with anybody. And I worked some out with them that's free, and you even get access to them for 30 days for free.
Wow, that is super awesome. That is amazing. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I love what you do. I can't wait to meet you in person again at one of our next events that we get the honor to hang out at and enjoy, so that we can turn around and serve our communities with our passion, our heart, and our soul. So thank you again so much.
My pleasure. This has been a blast. Thank you, Kitty.
If you enjoy the Loving Without Boundaries podcast, I know you'll also love the Open Nesters podcast with my friends Tessa and Amir, a poly couple with 3 adult kids, together for 36 years and open almost 25 of those. The Open Nesters podcast not only explores open relating, but opening to our best act of life. Act 3, where adult kids are getting ready to leave the nest and we get to reimagine life on our terms. Visit theopennesters.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Yours in the opening.